Howdy, I'm your instructor, J.T. Harvey. Perhaps you've seen my name on the syllabus or perhaps in the course description when you signed up for this. I'll be guiding you over these next 15 weeks, assuming that coronavirus doesn't kill us all, through this exciting journey of contending perspectives in economics. Now, I am assuming at this point that I will be reviewing the syllabus and assignments and so forth live in the classroom, and then of course zoomed to those who are joining us from around the globe. So I'm going to focus here on just the lectures. And let me tell you what I'm doing here. All right, so I'm going to start off very first lecture for the class right now. And, oh, check out my hat. Very exciting. I don't think we have any left, but we ought to order some more. All right. I'm going to start with the first lecture, and I've changed the class up a lot for this coronavirus semester. So what I have with me here to the side are the quizzes and exam I know I'm going to ask you. I've already written all that up for the first third of the material. So that way I can glance back at that and make sure I'm covering everything you need to hear, because I'm picking and choosing a bit relative to what I usually cover. I'm going to cut out a lot of the outside readings, which is not bad news to anyone, of course. I mean, it kind of is in the overall general sense. You'd like to learn more stuff, but on the other hand, it's liable to be a difficult semester, so let's cut back on the outside reading. So, let me tell you first of all, and I do not write clearly. My wife teaches 4th grade, and she came in here the other day and saw where I had been writing on the board for econometrics, which I taught this summer entirely online. That was certainly an adventure. And she made fun of my writing. So I went to my room and cried. We got a good pen here. Contending perspectives in econ. So I will do my best there. That looks legible, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do here. I'm going to zoom in a bit because you don't really need to see me all that badly, but the screen is important. Zoom. Zoom. Turn a little bit to that way, John. All right, so I may not be in shot all the time, but perhaps you'll be very thankful for that fact. Look, I am right now. Hi. So, contending perspectives in economics. So let me tell you, first of all, this is an extremely unique course that we're going to go over different schools of thought in economics. 8 of them? Yeah, because I just added one. 8 different schools of thought in economics. Most universities, and when I say most, I mean like 99%, don't even have such a class that goes over different schools of thought in economics. And I would guess that not a single other university on the planet actually requires that you take this class as an economics major. That's how strongly we feel that in order to be effective critical thinkers, you need to hear more than one view. And monetarist versus Keynesian is practically the same view. Those are 2 branches of the same school of thought. We're going to go over Marxism, we're going to go over feminism, we're going to go over institutionalism and so on, Austrianism. Schools of thought that have pretty significant disagreements with others on what represents evidence. Here's one you probably never thought of. Did you know there are schools of thought that are not crazy about the idea that we use general equilibrium analysis to understand economics? Now, I don't think there's a school of thought that says, hey, there are contexts within which that's useful. I believe they all believe that. But there are some schools of thought, like the Austrians, who say, hey, we take this way too far. That when you're modeling a modern macro economy, a capitalist economy, that the idea that the economy comes to a resting point and stops there and doesn't move again, doesn't move from the equilibrium point until some external force acts, in other words, something shifts the supply or the demand curve, they say that's a terrible way to understand capitalism. Capitalism is in itself a dynamic system with new ideas coming out, entrepreneurs creating solutions, consumers' tastes changing, and so on. The impression that a student gets, and there's a lot of subtle things that you learn in any discipline where we don't necessarily come out and say it, and these are the worst ones, or I shouldn't say worst because sometimes they're quite appropriate, but these are the ones that are hardest to see, where we don't come right out and say, this is how you should explain the economy. We just explain it that way. And so we do it that way over and over and over and over until it's sunk into your head, this is the way one understands economic systems. And there are schools of thought that actually are strong proponents of market systems, that's the Austrians, who say, that's got some limited usefulness. I'd say maybe in a lot of places. But as far as trying to understand a macroeconomic system, mathematical models leave us, as an Austrian, leave us cold, that they don't capture the sense of what a macroeconomic system really is. And then you've got people like the Marxists who, interestingly enough, draw a lot of their original thought from mainstream economics, from Adam Smith, but then they come to a completely different conclusion. So they add sort of similar tools of analysis in some respects to the neoclassicals, the mainstream school of thought, and come to different conclusions. So, point being, we're gonna bring stuff up. You're gonna say, I never even thought of it that way before. Now, does that mean you should change your mind and think this new way? Well, of course, that's impossible. That you cannot finish this course. Let me jot this down. You are not going to finish this course believing every school of thought. That's impossible. We're going to cover neoclassical, which is the mainstream. Then next we'll do Marxist. Then what next, John? Oh, I think that's it for exam 1, yeah. Then we'll do Austrian. That's like a libertarian type point of view. And post-Keynesian. So let me show you. Up here's exam 1. X1. I normally, well, I'll just tell you. And then we're going to do, I'm going to do them a little out of order that I usually do because it was going to work better during this particular semester. New institutionalist, I hate writing this word, institutionalist. All right. There's exam 2. And then we're going to do institutionalist. As one might guess, it actually makes some sense to do the institutionalist before the new institutionalist, but it's not going to work this semester, the way I have things laid out in order to make sure that people can take this class online if they need to. It spaced things out better. What's next, John? Oh, yeah, feminist. Oh, there's a better pen. Feminist. And then Econ. Let me mark that for exam 3. X3. All right, so there's exams 1, 2, and 3 over the course of the semester. Now, what I was starting to say a minute ago was that, look, you're not going to end the semester being well, what kind of economist are you? Well, I'm a neoclassical Marxist, Austrian, post-Keynesian, new institutionalist, feminist, ecological economist. They contain mutually exclusive propositions. There are things here where they outright strongly disagree with this school of thought right here. So you can't believe both of those. Can you take elements? Of course. And really, the big goal of this class is not to have you choose. Because, I mean, after all, you're just starting off in your journey, if you will, of learning economics. So you shouldn't be at a stage where you think you can pick. You don't have to. At this point, you just sit back and listen. That's kind of the nice thing. You sit back, it's like, well, okay, tell me what these are like, huh? And then, basically, by the end of the semester, you'll be like, confused, potentially, but enthused. Confused, but enthused. Confused, but enthused. As a matter of fact, I did a survey of my class one time. I published an article on it where it said that like 90% of the class actually felt more confident after they finished the course. The 10% that didn't feel more confident, that felt more confused, nevertheless felt more enthused. That they were like, yeah, I'm not sure what's going on, but this is kind of exciting. I want to try to figure it out. I want to think about it. So that's why we want you to take this course. Different people teach it a different way. I use more of a shotgun approach. As you can see, I do all these different schools of thought. I don't know what other professors do. We don't get into each other's business. And I know they do more than one, but I know, like, for example, when Dr. Garnett used to teach it, he might pick 3 of them and just do 3 of them. Perfectly fine. You don't want to pick 3 that are almost exactly the same, but you pick 3 just to show some contrast. So that's where this class came from. I should back up a bit. We realized that a number of us were coming from different schools of thought about 10 years ago, and Dr. Mike Butler, said, we ought to have a class that directly addressed that issue, that talks about the different schools of thought, so that once you take a class from somebody else, you have some background in more than one approach. And so that's where this class was born. Now, there was no textbook for it, which is why you have to buy a text by some guy named John Harvey, because I wrote a book for it. And let me tell you this, it was a horribly painful experience, right? It's really hard to write about somebody else's school of thought in a way that is not biased. Now, to some extent, everything's biased. The very choice of what to talk about betrays a bias. You're giving the Cowboys Giants football score. Well, you're interested in football. You're obviously a sporting fan or whatever. The score itself is not subjective. It was 31-20 or whatever it was. But the very fact that we're focusing on that issue as something important, with the infinite with the infinite variety of phenomena that exist on the planet, we decided to talk about that, is in and of itself a bias. So there's no way to get completely away from bias. But I was really worried about writing a book that subconsciously pushed my view, all right? And so, to fight that, what I did was, first of all, I did two things. First, I wrote every chapter as if I was a believer in that, as if I was trying to convince the reader, this is the greatest thing anyone's ever thought of, all right? That's one thing. But really the more important thing was, I sent the Austrian chapter off to 2 Austrians. I said, what do y'all think of this? Would you assign this? And I took every single change they recommended. I sent it to Dr. Doug Butler it wasn't too hard because he's right here in Fort Worth. And I sent it to Dr. Sam Bostaff, he's retired from the University of Dallas, who's an Austrian. And they gave me every single change they recommended, I made. Likewise with the Marxist chapter, post-Kant, I sent every single one. I didn't send the neoclassical one out because that one's fairly standard. But the others, and plus I have a PhD in neoclassical economics. The others, I made sure I sent it to somebody, right? And the suggested changes ranged from, hey, that's pretty darn good, John. Thanks for writing this, to, oh my God, you need to rewrite this chapter, it sucks, right? So I did. I rewrote the chapter. And in the end, the people I sent it to for reading the feminist chapter were like, no, this is pretty good now. I said, okay. Now someone who is a feminist economist would be comfortable with that chapter. So I tried to do that throughout this book here, and I try to do it in lecture as well. I'll tell you one thing that is difficult, and that is the fact that I know far more about some schools of thought than I do others. So I'm going to end up giving more examples, that sort of thing. So that's one of those biases, all right? It's one of those subconscious biases that you try to stay away from, but it's impossible to stay completely away from. So this course is going to be covering these 8 different schools of thought. And, oh heck, what else was I going to tell you? Let's see. About that? No. Shucks, I was right on something right there, and then I totally forgot. All right, anyway, about these 8 different schools of thought, and not expecting you to, well, what am I expecting you to remember? I have it written down right here. Okay, I was writing a paper a couple years ago, and it was on how to teach intermediate macro. And so in doing the background research on that paper, I came across something in the pedagogical literature, the literature on how to teach, called Remember to Know Goals. And the idea is that the instructor should have a certain limited number of goals for every class, that they're thinking to themselves, 2, 3, 10 years from now, what do I hope the students still took with them from this class? Things that they no longer remember from the class, but has simply become part of their broader knowledge of the way the world works, that they have incorporated that into their worldview. And you can't have too many of these things. You're not going to remember the labor theory of value. You're not going to remember the action axiom and so forth. But what am I hoping that you take away from this course? All right, I got a list. Oh, and I should back up and tell you that when I was writing that paper, I hadn't heard of Remember to Know Goals before, and I wrote the paper as if, now be sure you put in some Remember to Know Goals in your class, even though I didn't. But after I wrote the paper, I started doing that because it seemed like a really good idea. And I've got 4 remember to know goals here. And I've got them in order of, roughly speaking, which ones am I most, if you could only remember one thing, what would I hope it would be? What about 2 things? What about 3 things? On down like that. So here's the first one. Let me set aside this really, really good pen. Hey, where's the dog? That suddenly worries me. He ran in here a minute ago. Here's what he does. He grabs contraband, and then he runs off somewhere secretly to chew and destroy it, like on top of a couch or something like that. So anyway, I'm a little concerned that he was in here and now he's gone, and it makes me think he found something. Anyway, we'll see. Melanie's not home. She teaches 4th grade, and it is today, August 4th. Because yesterday was my wedding anniversary, and coincidentally, it was also Melanie's wedding anniversary. So anyway, she's off getting her 4th grade classroom ready. All right, so I have to watch the dog by myself. The very first remember to know goal I've got here, if you don't remember anything else in this class, I'd like you to come away from this knowing there exist well-developed, research-active alternatives to the economic mainstream. This isn't the only school of thought up here at the top, even though in the vast majority of economics programs, that is what you come away with this impression that there are no other schools of thought, or there used to be, but all the Marxists are dead and all the Austrians, and there are some common misconceptions and stereotypes about people outside of the mainstream. For example, all they do is write papers about the history of economic thought, about back when Keynes wrote so-and-so, or back when Veblen wrote so-and-so, and that's simply not true. As you will see, that there are journals that exist right now, that papers are being published. There are conferences with all of these. These are all research active, and these are all well developed. These have been around, with the possible exception of the last one down here. They've been around for a long time. This is the newest one here, probably the second newest right there. But they've been around for a long time. This is not a history class, all right? Now, granted, when we get to Marxism, I'm not talking about Marx. But what I'm really trying to talk about is, what do modern Marxists do? There are Marxists now, all right? And what kind of research do they do, and what things do they focus on, and so forth. By the way, the school of thought that students time after time are most surprised by is the Marxist one. I'm not saying they come away Marxist, but they're like, oh, I thought he just said to share stuff. I didn't know it was about all this other stuff too. He actually didn't even really say that. But anyway, all right. But we will get there very soon. Second thing, our discipline has evolved in a manner that leads to the suppression of alternative paradigms. All right, that leads to the suppression, intentional or not. Some of it is unintentional, and see, remember what I was saying earlier about not being able to draw? Let me erase that. I was trying to do a bracket. Okay. That all those from Marxism on down, it is difficult to have a successful career as an academic economist with following any of these other schools of thought. All right? And we're going to talk about that a little bit at the very first part of the course. Here's the third thing that I hope you take away from this course. Critical thinking and analysis is enhanced by learning competing perspectives. I saw a paper by a neoclassical economist, a guy named John Siegfried, and granted he was talking about high school economics. But he said, at the high school level, he says, we don't want to let students know there are other schools of thought. He said, we should only teach one. And of course, he doesn't mean one of these, he means that one. We should only teach one school of thought, and because it might confuse and depress them to find out that there's disagreement in our discipline. Oh my God, students love that. I love that, to find out that so-and-so hates so-and-so, and so-and-so sent a nasty letter to so-and-so, that there's a controversy. Controversy is exciting. As I said, I wrote that paper about my own students' attitudes in contending perspectives, and they actually found it much more exciting. And I think I said this already, but I'm about to say it again if I did, that the item that comes up on our graduating senior survey, maybe I didn't say it yet, our graduating senior survey that we administer every semester, the item that comes up by far the most often is, what do you think is the strength of our program? I should say second most often. First most often is the faculty, which is really nice of the students to say. And we, in fact, all do really, really enjoy teaching. And I'm glad that people come away with that perception. But number two, after the faculty themselves, is that we teach different schools of thought. It comes up over and over and over that people say they really enjoy that. All right. We think that you get a lot more. Your brain really starts to churn through when you hear something like, yeah, we're not crazy about general equilibrium analysis, whereas it's a core concept up here. And you're like, wow, I assumed everybody believed that. Now, does this mean that you're going to come away, in general equilibrium analysis is this, the little graph thing. That is an example of general equilibrium analysis that I showed you a minute ago. So, are you going to come away no longer wanting to use general equilibrium analysis? No, not necessarily. But you will have actually thought about it and not just taken it for granted. So you will be much more aware of the strengths and weaknesses than some. Have you ever met a convert to a religion as opposed to somebody who was brought up in the religion? The converts always know a heck of a lot more about the religion than the people who were brought up in it, because they had the opportunity to contrast it with something else and to make it a conscious choice. Rather than growing up hearing one and only one thing, and it could be any one of these, it happens in our discipline that it's this one, but it could be any one of them. If you've been brought up hearing one and only one thing, then there hasn't really been any challenge, and you haven't really thought through why you accept that view, other than that's what everybody else says. Now, last one, fourth one. Well, this is very similar to what I just said. You cannot truly understand the uniqueness or strengths and weaknesses of a perspective without seeing alternatives. How do you know whether or not this one makes the most sense? How do you know whether or not this one makes the most sense? How do you know whether or not this one makes the most sense if they're the only ones you've ever heard? Until you hear another one, you don't have any idea what to compare it to. And so that's why we teach this class, and I'm convinced that's why students like it so much, this aspect of our program, because it is so much more interesting and exciting. And again, you're really lucky to be at TCU for so many reasons, but particularly here because this is exceedingly rare that anybody even offers such a course, let alone requires it of every economics major. All right, great stuff. All right, so there's introduction. And now I'm going to start actually covering some concepts here. Now, if we were in the classroom, and what I'm going to do this semester is I'm going to do just what I did in econometrics over the summer. And I will have emailed you all this, and perhaps I'll be using this video just because it's helpful to have it 10 years from now when there is no coronavirus. But let me just speak specifically to the coronavirus semester. What I did in econometrics this summer was I had enough videos put together to cover the entire course before the course started. All right, the course was in July. I had all the videos done back in May. And I also did an individual video for every single homework assignment that they had in there to make sure I covered, background and stuff like that. So, in other words, we really didn't have anything we had to cover in class, but we met every morning, all right? And I would, hoping people would watch the video, I would then go through the stuff that I knew from having taught that class since 1988, focus on the things that I knew they'd have the most trouble with and answer questions and so forth. And the attendance was actually remarkable. Now, it could be that people were logging on Zoom and then going back to sleep, but hey, they had to get up in the first place, right? And this was at 8:30 in the morning. So this was an early class. So I'm going to do that same thing this semester, is you're going to have enough videos to cover everything for the course. And you're going to have the reading already. But we're going to use the lectures to highlight things, to make sure that the things that I know you're going to have the most trouble with, we can cover those clearly for you there. And like I said, it was really nice this summer. That how many people actually showed up for those when you really didn't need to if you could follow all the material. But, hey, that's why you're paying not for an online course. Well, that's why you want me to be there too. People have been talking about, well, universities won't be the same anymore. Everyone will just do it online. I hate online. Students hate online. We'd much rather be there in person. I can't even begin to imagine this replacing me standing in front of the classroom, making all kinds of funny jokes and stuff like that, and knowing people's names. That was really just disappointing this summer. I got to know a couple of people, but not really very many because it's hard over Zoom. But I digress. Okay, so the first thing I want to give you, which, and if we were taking this class without coronavirus, and I'd be doing all these study questions, which I'm not doing I'm not doing it that way this semester, but I'm still going to follow along with these because that's the material that's going to be on the exams and the quizzes. But anyway, this part of the lecture here would have been study questions 1 through 6, and maybe I'll post those. Anyway, 1 through 6. And this is just some background terminology, okay? Some definitions. And the very first thing that I cover in every single one of my classes except econometrics is the difference between validity and cogency. Was that the great pen or was it this one? It was this one. What's wrong with me? Okay. Validity and cogency. These are properties of an argument. And let me illustrate. Let's see here. All dogs enjoy eating pens. These are my premises, or my assumptions. All dogs enjoy eating pens. Coble is our dog's name, named after Melanie's grandmother. That was her maiden name. Coble is a dog. All right. So there's my two premises. Here is my conclusion, which we mark with 3 little dots. For what reason, I don't know. Therefore, Coble enjoys eating pens. All right? Now, that's an argument. Every argument, regardless of how complicated, is really just a series of premises that lead to a conclusion. And sometimes this conclusion becomes the premise of the next argument, one of the premises of the next argument, and so on. But it's really just a series of premises that lead to a conclusion. Now, there are 2 possible properties of this argument. One is validity, and validity only asks that it is internally logical. What do I do with that great pen? I'm going to start leaving it right here. That it's internally logical. That the premises really do lead to that conclusion. So, for example, here, you're sort of saying, all dogs enjoy eating pens and Coble is a dog. Does that lead to and completely support the conclusion Coble enjoys eating pens? Well, yeah, if all dogs enjoy eating pens and if Coble is a dog, then it must be true that Coble enjoys eating pens. The argument is therefore valid. If the conclusion is supported by the premises, then the argument is valid. All right? So validity is that property right there where the conclusion is supported by the premises. I'll show you the definition that I have written out here in just a minute. So that's the definition of validity, all right? Now, cogency. Well, should I stop there? No, let me tell you cogency next. All right. Cogency, an argument is only cogent if it is both valid plus the premises are warranted or reasonable, all right? So there's 2 things there. An argument is only cogent if it is valid and those premises are reasonable. Those premises are, what was the other word I used? Reasonable and, I forgot. Oh, wait, maybe it's right here. Warranted, there it is, right there. Warranted. Now, notice I didn't say true. We got to be careful as scientists not to say that, all right? What if you were the first person to ever see a dolphin? Then you say, oh, look at that fish. Well, that'd be a reasonable conclusion under the circumstances, all right? So until you've gone into it more deeply, there's like, oh, nope, I think it's a mammal, all right? So that all of our conclusions, all of our are always tentative and subject to rejection, all right? So we don't want to say true for the premises. We just want to say warranted. Given our body of knowledge right now, does that seem like a reasonable thing to say? Is it reasonable to believe that Coble is a dog? I'm pretty sure. All right, so the vets examined him. He was born of 2 dogs in a beautiful, lovely union that they had. So I'm pretty sure he's a dog. Do all dogs enjoy eating pens? Probably not. Probably not. Perhaps some of you listeners out there are aware of a dog that doesn't like eating pens. Well, then already, I'll use orange. And that's not really warranted. All right, we can't really see that. That's probably not true. That if we were going to make that argument, we better do some background research and show some evidence that, no, in fact, all dogs enjoy, we know all dogs go to heaven, according to the Disney movie, but do they all enjoy eating pens? We don't know. So this argument is clearly valid. There's no question about that. But is it cogent? Well, that depends on whether or not all dogs enjoy eating pens. All right. So now, this is what I want to say next about this, and why do I cover this in so many classes? Validity is relatively objective. Let me go ahead and erase all this. Dagnabbit, this used to be in my office back when we were in a trailer, which was probably, 15 years ago now. And they let us take they're just going to tear the trailer down, and they weren't going to use the whiteboards. And if you want your whiteboard, you can keep it. It's got a crack in it right there. Melanie said I could have a new one if I wanted to, so I might order one. So she's in charge of the finances. All right, going back to validity and cogency. Validity. Validity is relatively objective. I mean, we could disagree about politics, about religion, about whatever, but if all dogs enjoy eating pens and Coble's a dog, Coble enjoys eating pens, all right? We can agree that, obviously you could talk to a stupid person and they wouldn't agree with you. But otherwise, quite clearly, if those two premises hold, then the conclusion clearly holds as well. So, fairly objective. We can disagree about all kinds of stuff and still agree about whether or not a particular argument is valid. And economists across the spectrum are really careful about validity. You very rarely find a school of thought that has put forward an argument where you end up saying, actually, I'm not even sure that makes sense even under its own assumptions. All right, so very rare that you find an argument that's not valid. Okay, and everyone's real careful about that. And that's one of the reasons why we use so much math, by the way. With the math, then, here's an equation for a supply curve, function of price, an equation for a, In fact, let's do it this way. Quantity supplied equals quantity demanded equals, and you can write out an equation of some sort, income. And then quantity supplied equals to quantity demanded. If you solve for this, then you get the equilibrium price and stuff like that. Well, that's one of the reasons why we use the math, is that it makes the validity so much easier to show. Right? Now, unfortunately, cogency is pretty subjective. Warranted, reasonable. I mean, even in the same school of thought, they could disagree about whether or not that is a reasonable assumption. And the other problem is, a reasonable assumption varies by what question are you trying to answer at this point. That the kind of assumptions you make in your macro model are also driven by what specific phenomenon are you trying to study right now. We could be doing a research paper on the Great Depression and not be interested in wages, be interested just in unemployment, and there's no reason to include wages. All right, that on a macro level, there's not necessarily a reason to even include wages in that analysis. Now, another economist might say, even within the same school of thought, no, you got to include wages. You have to include an analysis of wages. And so this is where you get into arguments that cannot be resolved as easily as questions of validity can. So when we have different schools of thought, not just within, but without, they're deciding different things are reasonable. They're deciding different things are warranted. That the reason why, who was I talking to the other day? I can't remember now. And the reason why an Austrian might not agree with the post-Keynesian isn't simply because the Austrian hasn't heard the same things the post-Keynesian has, or the post-Keynesian hasn't heard the same things that the Austrian has. They treat different things as evidence. They treat different things as being compelling. And so the big differences from school of thought to school of thought are going to be in cogency, right? And we're going to talk about this as the semester goes on, that this is a very, let me give you an example. Works perfectly with this. Where do you get your premises? Observation or intuition. All right? With Coble eating pens, did I perform a study where I studied 100 dogs and, put, in front of them a pen and then a cell phone or whatever to see which one they preferred to chew on? Did I do a study like that? Or did I sit and think about it and think to myself, well, dogs like X, this represents Y, but X, and go through just sort of thinking about it, like what seems reasonable, what seems logical to me, all right? There's a big difference among schools of thought on this. Some of them believe that this can be very deceptive because you tend to see what you expect to see. There are others who say, and so therefore you should use this. You should just sit and think about it and think what makes most sense. There are others who say this is equally affected by bias. And unless we check it against the real world, we end up just concluding what we wanted to conclude in the first place. So there's a big disagreement among, I guess, probably different disciplines as well, but I'm only familiar with economics, about whether or not in building our premises, we should be taking these from, I'm sorry, I'm keeping an eye on the monitor because the video is going to stop right about, it's not going to go as far as 40 minutes. And I can put it back together later, but I don't want to be like in the middle of a sentence when it stops. So I'm going to keep half an eye over there. But for some reason, it breaks everything I video. There's probably a setting I can change somewhere. Breaks it in no bigger than like 40-minute chunks, and we're up to 36 minutes. All right, so here's an example right here of a place where they would disagree with each other because they would say, I saw a presentation one time. Okay, so let me give you an example of this right here. It was a presentation talking about the history of money. How did money evolve in Western society? And one of the economists was a post-Keynesian, and one was an Austrian who leaned this way. The post-Keynesian is citing historical evidence. Well, in Germany in the 12th century they did this. In France in the 14th century they did this. This person is backward engineering money. This person is saying, well, what functions does money fulfill? Well, it fulfills, function A, B, and C. Aha! So at some point they must have had a problem with A, B, and C. So he's kind of inventing the history backwards, thinking about what does money do, and if it does these things, it must have had a problem with that, right? Now, they were talking totally at cross purposes. Because when he would bring up, yeah, but that's not what happened, he was like, I don't care. Because what he was saying was that the historical record was not put down in the 12th century or whatever in a way. They weren't thinking to themselves, boy, we better be careful writing this down because one day Randy Ray, who was the economist on this side, he's going to want to write a paper on this. So we better be darn sure we're really careful with what we record and that we don't impart any biases ourselves. He believes, this guy over here believed that the historical record was biased and was contaminated. He believed that this person over here already knew what they wanted to conclude when they started, and then they just made up premises to, like you start with your conclusion of, therefore Coble likes to chew pens, start with that and then build backwards. That's what he was accusing him of doing. Which one's right? Is it possible that the historical record is contaminated? Of course it is. Is it possible that somebody could come into a conclusion, could start with their conclusion and then build the premises afterwards to support their conclusion? Absolutely. So, it's a problem. All right, so that's the very first, what would have been in a regular semester study question. Let me show it to you here real quick. Slide this down here where I can see it. An argument is valid if the conclusion is supported by the premises. An argument is cogent if it is valid and the premises are warranted. All right, that's in the book. But if I were you, what I would do is, if you haven't already done this, pause the video and write that down and make a note of that so that you can have that record there. I'm going to talk to you in class about how to study for everything, but that'll mesh in with that. Okay, let's see. All right, next thing. I think I'm going to stop the video if it's not already stopped itself and then restart here in the next concept. Be right back.